And types of disturbance. So these animals have been dealing with big things forever. And Mount St. Helens went off, like it's done a lot of times before. And other volcanoes, we have pretty deep pockets of volcanic ash right around here. Fire, landslides, earthquake, wind, avalanche, all of those. They're happening all the time. Sometimes they're way bigger than other times. Mount St. Helens, the fish, pretty sure a lot of them probably died, or they all died following that event, but it took not very many years for them to recolonize, for steelhead to come back into the Toutle River and reestablish themselves. It was just a few years. And I've seen something like that too on a creek called Mission Creek that flows into Kashmir. We're completely buried in mud. Overnight, every fish was dead, and then next year the steelhead were back. So these things can happen overnight. Because the fish aren't there all the time, they're just not there when the event happens, and they're spread out over multiple year classes. It's a really good strategy for recolonization in a landscape that has a lot of disturbance and all the time. This slide here is a lot of information on this slide, kind of showing you what happens after a fire with all different elements of habitat. So we've got suspended sediment, which is the really fine stuff that the water carries. It's what makes the water look cloudy. Nutrients, woody debris, solar radiation, primary production, leaf litter input, and then insects called shredders, grazers, and collectors, and then the fish at the bottom. And you'll notice that axis on the bottom is the first two, FWSS, is fall, winter, spring, and summer, the normal year, and then post-fire. And then on the right-hand side goes from 2 years to 300 years. So kind of wrap your head around that for a second. And so what you see is kind of a normal year of like suspended sediment. You have your spring freshet and a spike in the turbidity of the water. And then it goes down in the summertime, and then boom, you have your fire, and then you might have a storm event, and right after that, you have a peak in suspended sediment. And then the following year in the summer, you might have a big thunderstorm, and then you have a really huge peak in your suspended sediment. And then it tapers off over time. Same thing for large wood, or nutrient input. So there's a lot of nutrients tied up in the forest, in those trees. And when they burn, those nutrients are released. They go up as smoke and carbon and everything, but a lot of the other ones like nitrogen and phosphorus and things like that are released to the water. And so you have a really tremendous boost in production in the water. And that's what that is showing right there. And then woody debris increases, obviously, because the trees fall over and fall in the water, which is a good habitat building feature. More solar radiation because the shade's gone. Your primary production goes up because you have more nutrients and you have more sunlight, so that's more photosynthesis. And then you have your leaf litter drops way off because your trees are all burned up. But then it picks up again and it comes back in a few years, 10 to 50 years that says. But what I've seen here is those streamside alders and willows really respond to the fire, and actually on a smaller stream like Beaver Creek or some of the other creeks where we've had fires, they actually get shaded over fairly quickly with that response, because there's no competition from all the big trees that were shading them. And the beavers actually like that. The beavers come in gangbusters after the fire. And so that'll be something fun to watch if people can put up with them. Because one thing about this fire is it burned where people live, and our other fires have been higher up in the forest, and so we've been able to watch the beavers come in after the fires. Well, hopefully they'll be allowed to do that on Beaver Creek. And then the insects, they kind of follow that leaf litter. and the recolonization of riparian areas. And then on the bottom line is the fish. So you have a big, a drop. The fish do die during the fire. But then in response to all these other things going on, their population actually rebuilds and can rebuild to where it's higher than it was before the fire. So, and it's in part because of all this habitat creation and recycling of the nutrients, taking them out of all the biomass that in the forest and putting it back into production. Here's the flood. This is at my house on Beaver Creek. That wasn't this year. This was like in 2000, when was that? 2011, I think. Yeah. So the floods move wood around, delivers and moves sediment around. Off-channel refuge areas are really important during high water so that the fish have a place to get up and out of the storm that is happening in their main rivers or streams. Landslides follow the fires. This is up at 30 Mile Creek, and this is a really big landslide right here. So this one was kind of here already, and then this one happened after the fire. And we had, the fire burned in 2001, and then a few years later, like in 2003 or 2004, we had one of those really intense rainstorms like we had this summer, and this whole place came down. And then it dammed up the river here, and it caused all this really, really cool habitat to be created. So this is just like a huge nutrient sink now, or source, for the Chewuk River. And I haven't looked recently because I don't work there anymore, but I'd imagine this is very productive from a fish standpoint, from a wildlife standpoint. There's ducks and all that kind of stuff up there, moose. So it's pretty cool. So, the hillside came down and it muddied up the river. It added all kinds of sediment to the river, but it's actually a creative process.
Was that off 20 Mile Creek?
That's called Dog Creek. So it's upstream of 20 Mile and just downstream of 30 Mile. Do you know what peak it's on? It drains off of, John?
No, it's pretty close to where the firefighter memorial is.
Yeah, the memorial is
Right there.
right in there. Yeah, and the end of the road is just right up there. Does that help?
Yeah.
It is pretty flat up on top. Drops right off. And then a slide here, some data showing what happened right after those fires. So we had the 30 Mile fire, we had the Farewell fire, we had a bunch of them, big fires up there. And then we had those rainstorms in 2003, 2004, where a lot of things came down, just massive landslides. And so the blue bar is before the fire, before the landslides, this one. And then we had the landslides and it went way up. And then now, as of, this is the average between 2008 and 2013, it's kind of back down or below pre-fire levels. Before the fire, the Chewuk was kind of limited in spawning gravels and things like that, and now it's got a fresh supply of spawning gravel, and also pretty complicated habitat up there. The thing about that complicated habitat is that the trees all burned up and they all fell in the river, but that's its wood load for like the next 100 years until that forest can regenerate. So that's a long time. And there's photographs from the 50s, or maybe it was before the 50s, showing in that area where we just looked, really big projects to clean the wood out of the rivers. They bulldozed it out. And that's happened in a lot of places, all over the place. And it's happened in a lot of different places here where the wood has been cleaned out. And so the river that we're looking at might not really be the river in its natural state, even though it looks really beautiful and pretty. And so now this upper Chewuk area has got everything back. that it had before we did those things. And so it's in a really high functional state right now. But that's going to degrade over time as time goes by. That wood's going to rot or break up or get buried. So it's really functional now, and it'll go down into a less functional state, but still pretty good. Meanwhile, the other streams in the Methow are going to be on a slightly different cycle, perhaps, and will be in a slightly different place in terms of their productivity, and the fish will move around and respond to that, take advantage of that. Some populations will be doing better when others aren't doing as well, and so when you look at the whole thing, it's just kind of in this nice, state of function as opposed to like a big boom and bust kind of thing. So if you just look at one spot on the planet, it might look really dire and then really great, but when you even it all out over time, it's like that diversified portfolio idea that I had up there a little bit earlier. Here's another landslide in Lake Creek above Black Lake where the bull trout spawn, and bull trout aren't supposed to like sediment at all, but this thing just got absolutely stuffed following the fire. All of these things kicked in and really, really filled that creek up with all kinds of stuff, rocks and gravel and sand and wood, burned up all the trees. It's thick with alders now. And the fish spawned on it right away. So these landslides came down, they dammed the channel, backed up the water, and created hyporheic flow. So remember earlier I said hyporheic flow is the kind of flow that is under the river, and where it pops up it makes springs in the bed of the river, and that's the stuff that the fish really like to use to spawn. So it created that, it created a new spawning area. This is a little bit about how much water you have and how much sediment you have and the ability of the river to be able to move it. And if you have less water and you have a big sediment supply, the river bed will grade and will build up. If you cut off your sediment supply and you increase your water supply, the river will degrade and cut down. If you change the slope of a river and you straighten it out, the river, the energy goes up, so the effect of the water, the scouring ability of the water goes up, and if the sediment supply remains the same, then the channel will degrade down through its bed. When it's doing that, it picks up sediment. So it kind of corrects itself, and then would try to meander again.
So you talked about a new spawning area being created. Is it a better spawning area, or is it not so good in the first year or so, but over time is better?
I think it's just a different area. And I think, so back in Lake Creek, one thing that happened up there was down below the lake. So we used to have really giant bull trout that would spawn above the lake. And right now, I think because of all the wood load down below the lake, that those big migratory bull trout might not be able to get up there right now. Either that or they're getting fished out. That's a possibility as well. And so right now, the fish that are spawning there aren't as large. But there's still the same number of spawning fish there, so it's kind of just a different location, I guess, is where the spawning is now.
So if you think of our fires now being bigger, higher intensity, as opposed to the old fires before fires were being fought, is the habitat for fish not as good now as it was historically? Any way of knowing that, if that is the case?
So I don't know if the fires are certainly bigger, and we've been putting them out, and so we've been it's almost like a dam. You're storing all that energy up there in those trees, and then it's going to break sooner or later. And so I'm not sure. For me, this is my opinion, and I'm not a fire expert. It seems like maybe the intensity might be the same, but the fires are just happening all at once, so it's just much more extensive. But when you look at the percent of severe fire in each fire, you see like the severities, those are usually pretty low percentages, or like, 10, 50, 10%, or is high severity. And Susan could disagree with me perhaps, but what's happening now is they're happening all at the same time over really huge areas. So that idea of a diversified portfolio is kind of difficult to meet when you have all of your, everything invested in one event. So if now that we've had these really big fires, if we could get back to the smaller, patchier fires, that would be much better, because then you have these disturbances happening with the same, they might be as intense, but they're just not as frequent, and they're spread out over the landscape. Do you agree with that, Susan, or?
Yeah, I think that over the last 20 years, we've had a lot of high severity fire events. So the Methow, for example, had around 65% of it was classified as moderate to high severity. So 65% of the landscape was actually a standard placing fire, which is pretty unusual.
Yeah.
And then I know that the Farewell fire also was pretty high in terms of severity. So they've all happened within the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, and they're big.
Yeah, they're big.
They're really big. And so we're getting big responses. The fish seem to be, and the habitat seems to be responding pretty well to it. But, time will tell if this keeps happening. So, go ahead.
I fish, and I noticed after the Pewauk fires that there's a lot more sediment for several years in the upper Methow.
Yeah.
And that probably isn't going to affect the hatchery fish too much, but it seems it would be taking away spawning areas in the part of sections of the Methow, or at least changing it.
So the sediment you saw was like below the Pewauk River.
Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of sand. Yeah.
a lot of fines.
Yeah, and if we can, if you have a simplified habitat down there, like with not a lot of wood and not a lot of complexity, and there's side channels are cut off and the river's been straightened and things like that, then those effects are magnified. But if you can have, areas of roughness and diversity, complexity within that area, then those gravels can sort, and those fines can sort. And also if your main river is connected to its floodplain, so that when you do have high waters, you get those overbank flows that carry those fines, and they put them on the floodplain and get them out of those main channels. So part of it is the supply from the fires, and the other part of it is a little bit of, and our Methow is not as bad as other rivers. It's actually pretty nice, but we still have some issues. And so the other part of it is just that disconnection from the floodplain on a simplified habitat in the main stem. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's a little bit of habitat simplification going on because of what we've done to the river, and then also the impacts of sediment supply from the fires.
It's really bad by the smoking of the base, so it's just a ditch.
Yes. Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work to try and make it not so ditch-like. And I noticed the fishermen like fishing on that now. Some of that ditchness, though, is in that section is also natural terraces, ancient glacial terraces, and it gives it that look, especially with the cars. So it has yeah, they are coming out actually. It's going to be an art project, a big recycling effort, and some of them will get turned into something else. So this is again up in Lake Creek where we had the big landslides and the fires and all the trees fell down, and I've been doing these bull trout red surveys counting for spawning fish since 1994, and I still do it even though I don't work there anymore. And all I can say is it's gotten so much harder to walk up the river and count reds because there's so much wood in there, and the beavers are going crazy in there, and it just looks really fantastic. And I have this little rule for myself. I'm not backed up by any formal research, but the harder it is to walk through a riparian area or up a river, the better its condition. And here's a look at what happened with the wood counts in the Chihuahua following those big fires. And more is good from a fish habitat standpoint. So obviously down by river mile 9.5 to 18, there was no fire in that reach. That's just what it is. And so we don't see the big change there. Also, we've done a lot of wood removal projects there in the past. And then as you go upstream, there's less management happening. Denser forests, smaller streams, higher wood counts, but also the fires. That big jump is totally due to the fires and the landslides delivering wood to the channels. And here's Susan's really nice map of our recent fire history here. And so these are those Tripod and Farewell fires, 2006, 2003, 30 Mile, and then this big thing right here that we all got to experience this summer. The Needles fire right here, that one burned right along the Methow River and has really changed, added a lot of complexity to the main stem of the Methow. And now it's a lot harder to walk up as well. This is a great map. I saw a map from when they used all Barry George's work to model all the fire starts if they would have grown, and they would have taken on about this shape. Have you seen that? It was a while ago that I saw that. It was really interesting. Go ahead.
Talking about potential for more large fires in terms of the river too, and there's a lot of wide area here.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's a little
So
scary.
our habitat in the river here is a little bit worn out in the Twist River, and then Early Winters Creek up in here. Is that right? Yeah, Early Winters Creek goes that way. And those two places, to me, look like, that could be our next big spot. Although that landscape's pretty dissected, so maybe they won't get as big there, but certainly there's lots of fuel. And so hopefully we can keep this part of the landscape on schedule now and let it have lots of little fires instead of giganto ones, and be ready up in here. I'd imagine Richie's going to talk about that. Yeah. We burned all the way from the Columbia River to Canada. It's pretty amazing. Spring Chinook spawning by watershed. This is trying to get just, burned and unburned watersheds and what happened with the salmon spawning levels. And so if most of the fish spend 4 years at sea, so if you count 4 years from the time they were spawned, 4 or 5 years, it should give you an idea of what that year looks like. But then they're spread out over all those years, like I said before, so it's kind of hard to say what's going on. But we had fires here in 2003, and then we had the big tripod fire right here, and then here, wow, we went a long time without any really big fires. We were lucky. And then here we are again. So, and we had one that 2001, the 30 Mile. It wasn't that big. It was just really tragic and horrible. But yeah. So, but I guess the point of this slide is, and here's Early Winters Creek and Lost and the Twist, where we haven't had any fires. And what you see is, you don't see it just going to zero out here, so these fish have experienced really huge disturbance with these fires and then the subsequent landslides. and they're still coming back and spawning, and looks like they're being successful.
What happened in 2010?
So, you know, there's just things that happen out in the ocean. I mean, I could say, oh, we'll count back 5 years, but that wouldn't be appropriate. I mean, it's just like,
Yeah.
if I showed you 2001, it's like up here. It's up here, you know, so the ocean drives a lot what happens. But they are born here. And this is bull trap spawning and up in Lake Creek, and here's one of these little sneaker guys, this little male trying to get in on the action with these two. So this is in the burn, and these are really big fish. They're huge, they're gorgeous, and if you go back there right now, it's so dynamic. This is all underground now, and it's growing vegetation. It's becoming forest right in this spot. Just the way that the river moves around and deposits sediment, and then the seedlings take over really rapidly, and it becomes a forest. And you know, it's just moving laterally around all of these big log jams that are forming. And you can see how they're using the root tangles. I mean,